The more I learn about Once Upon a Con, the more I realize that most people do not know what actually happened here. It's not just an event that went wrong, it's so much more. There's so much more insidious layers that I keep pulling back. Every time I learn more about what's going on here, it's incredible. This is like Netflix documentary level of con here. Just as a disclaimer, this video is my opinion and my opinion alone, and all of this is true according to me, and I'm making it as truthful as possible. I'm trying to cut out any hearsay, but this is my opinion, and my opinion alone, and take that for what you will. Thanks. This is my 4th video about Once Upon a Con, so if you haven't seen the other videos, I'll put a little thing right here. Yeah, right there. So I definitely would go back and start from the first one, watch them through. There's a couple that are pretty long, but they will give the background information that you need to understand kind of like what's going on here. So as I'm sitting here filming this, it is September 19th. So everybody knows authors are still unpaid. No one has come forward saying that they've been paid. There's so many people on TikTok and Discord saying that they're not paid yet. This is for the doubloons. They accepted some doubloons and they expected to get paid back, and they did not. On August 29th, Once Upon a Con said in an email that they would pay back authors in 3 waves. Wave 1 would receive payments on August 31st, Wave 2 would get them on September 4th, and Wave 3 would get them on September 18th. Well, yesterday was September 18th, and no one has been paid yet. So that's still happening. Next, staff, obviously still unpaid. As a reminder, staff were promised rooms, crash space on site, and that's to reimburse them for their time that they spent actually working at the con. They didn't get paid, but they expected to have rooms and food, and they didn't get any of that. Also, they purchased food out of their own pockets for the cafe, so nobody has been reimbursed for that, and that's just insane to me. Next, vendors and guests were not reimbursed either. The only thing I hear that they actually got paid for were cosplay guests. They got their airfare paid for. But then they landed and then they had nowhere to stay. So this is what we're dealing with here. There were contracts in place saying that they would get their room paid for, and they have broken every single contract. There are also a huge number of refunds for all the people who couldn't attend the DC event. So just as a reminder, the event was supposed to happen in Lancaster. When it didn't happen in Lancaster, it moved to DC. A bunch of people said, okay, I can't go to the event any longer. And there was posts put out on social media at the time when they were moving to DC saying, oh, don't worry, if you can no longer go, please just request a refund by emailing this email address or whatever. And nobody has received any email or any refunds. There are an extraordinary number of people who have bought tickets that never got their money back and are still awaiting their money. And they've probably gone through other methods, such as disputing the payment through PayPal or their credit card at this point, because they're not getting that money back, that's for sure. There's also refunds for next year. So there's a lot of authors and vendors that book tables for next year ahead of the conference happening this year, and they still have not gotten any of those refunds. And that goes for anybody who bought even tickets to attend next year's con and then heard about what happened and then went through with the refund request process. Nobody has gotten any refunds yet. There's also Penelope, the Squishable. There was a Squishable that they promised was going to be at the event and they could pick it up on their way out, and there's never been a Squishable. There's no Squishable. They said it was lost in the Atlantic Ocean. There was tariffs, there was shipment issues, and Squishable confirmed that they never actually ordered any Squishables. They just got a prototype. So it's people paid for this and they still haven't received it. It's been unfulfilled, and in my opinion they will never receive this, but no refunds have occurred for the Squishable. Next is a big one. It's Make-A-Wish Foundation. They said that proceeds from the cafe or the maid cafe on site would go to Make-A-Wish. Unfortunately, that has not happened. There's no proof of that payment. And also, there are people that have been reaching out to Make-A-Wish and they're saying, no, we have not received any donations from Once Upon a Con. That donation did not happen. There's no proof of it. If they did do a donation, we would have heard about it by now. So that is an empty promise that happened. Why even say you're going to make a donation and then not do it? Like, that is just completely bonkers to me. It's messed up. It's evil. I don't understand it. And then there's also the set of refunds for attendees who went to the Maid Cafe and realized that there was no food, so they either could reschedule or they could get a refund. And it was about 50-50 split, according to the staff members who worked in cafe, of people who chose refund versus changing their reservation. And so this is where we're at, guys. Like, there's a ton of money not accounted for. They put the whole con on as a cash grab, except they didn't actually know how to run a con. And a con, an event, is not a cash grab. No one grabs cash through an event. It's not a good way to make money, especially a first year con. You're going to be in the red. You're going to break even. You're going to be in the red. No one is taking home a salary when it comes to first year cons. And also, a first year con held at the damn Gaylord, excuse me. It's just, there's so many things here that do not add up. From hundreds of videos I've watched, hundreds of messages, hundreds and hundreds of paragraphs of text about this, and none of that adds up. So maybe they didn't understand the huge expense associated with running a con, but then they position themselves, and I am saying they because, and I'm not going to mention their names in this particular video, or any video that I post on my YouTube, but there's two individuals that have been running Once Upon a Con, or ran Once Upon a Con, and they're married to each other. And there's some really problematic items that I found about them. And we're not going to cover anything that's hearsay. I'm only going to cover things that I found that are fact, to be clear on that. But there's a lot of doubt in my mind about the two individuals that have been running this con, and if they even had the background necessary in order to run a convention. One of them has a degree in, actually a pretty high level degree. I think it's a PhD in information technology, and they work in cybersecurity. And the other, I actually don't know their background particularly, but they worked in conventions, they said, for like 25 years. But they're about my age. I'm in my 30s. If I were to do something for 25 years, I would have started doing that in my teens, right? So I don't know if I would count things that I did in my teens as valid work experience, particularly, but you do you. However, they did give everybody a perception that they had a combined like 30 years of experience or something in running conventions, and also mentioned that they had a ton of experience working for huge conventions that have been going on for years, like Otakon. What we're seeing is that the numbers aren't really adding up as far as like how experienced they said they were in the beginning. But I digress. So a little bit of background on me. I have a master's degree in accounting with a special focus on nonprofit accounting and forensic accounting. And let me tell you, just from my perception and everything that I see and all available information that I can get, the math is not mathing here. At this point, we can call it what it is, and it looks like fraud to me. From everything that I've seen, from my professional opinion, this is fraud. All right, so now we're on the Bureau of Justice Statistics website, and this is a .gov website. You know, it's under the Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, and you can see financial fraud. So right here, we're looking at the definition of financial fraud in the National Crime Victimization Survey Supplemental Fraud Survey. Financial fraud is defined as acts that intentionally and knowingly deceive the victim by misrepresenting, concealing, or omitting facts about promised goods, services, or other benefits and consequences that are non-existent, unnecessary, never intended to be provided, or deliberately distorted for the purpose of monetary gain. But all I have to say here is that from the definition of financial fraud on this particular, Department of Justice website, we can understand that if someone is knowingly deceiving a victim and they're misrepresenting the facts. They're omitting facts, they're concealing facts, they're doing something like this in order to make a profit, to make money. That is fraud. So it's a pretty broad definition if you think of it like this. A lot of things can be fraud, right? Someone tells you something is X and you buy it and it's Y. That's a type of fraud, right? And here we also have the definition of fraud itself, the intentional misrepresentation of information or identity to deceive others, the unlawful use of a credit card or debit card, ATM, the use of electronic means to transmit deceptive information in order to obtain money or other things of value. So this, I don't think any of this was happening. Like they weren't stealing credit cards, right? But they were taking money and promising something that they knew that they would never, right? They would never give to the person. So they were promising something that they knew they were never going to deliver, and in the purpose to make money. Looking at that definition, it's easy to see how, if it can be proven that they were deceptive in what they were doing in order to trick people into spending money for certain things. It all goes back to the intention of the person committing the financial fraud, or the whoever's being accused. And that can be very tricky to prove in court, and it can be very tricky to prove on paper and find evidence of intention, as you can imagine. So I think what we're doing here is, I just wanted to kind of lay that out because there's a lot of authors and people who are owed money now who are pursuing legal avenues of receiving their money back. Right up until this week, there was a vibe on social media and in circles of authors talking about this kind of thing. And there was a vibe of, hey, let's see what happens. Let's see if they pay us back. Give them the benefit of the doubt. We're angry. We're mad. We didn't get paid back. But they said they were going to pay us back by the 18th. And everyone just kind of held their breath and just waited. Or I guess didn't hold their breath because, geez, don't hold your breath. Everyone just kind of waited. Like, hey, I think we're going to get paid back. Why would they say that they're going to pay us back, but then not do that? And when they proceeded to not pay anybody back and also not send out any sort of statement, then it becomes, okay, we're not going to get this money back, are we? Like, this is just not going to happen. Why would they say something and then deliberately not do that thing? And that is very deceptive. And so there's a lot of authors who are seeking representation. Now, before we go any further, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the two individuals that ran the con, because I don't want to say their names here or anything like that or identify them in any way. But I do want to mention some interesting things that I found out about them that made me think about things just very differently. Number one, they used to own a yoga studio together. So the con runners also owned a yoga studio in Pennsylvania, which they closed down in February 2025. So I am going to share something on the screen. This is their announcement whenever they said they were going to close down their studio. And I'm going to hide their names, even though they did not publicly hide their own names here. I'm doing that for you guys, just so you know. I'm not sharing your names. But I will scroll down and let's look at the comments. We have someone saying, I've been trying to get a hold of you guys for several weeks, trying to obtain a refund for a class you canceled. I guess this means I'm out of luck. They didn't get a comment. They didn't get a screw you. They didn't get a like. They didn't get a nothing. And so then they also have another comment here. I assume I'm out of luck with a gift card. I'm just now seeing that you closed. And you can pause to read any of those things, but yes, I cut out any identifying information. The one thing this does is it shows a history of deceptive behavior in business. What I don't want anybody to do, and why I am covering up their names, you can easily find them online. They've made themselves very public. But I don't want to be someone who is spreading their names or information that could identify them beyond what they've shared online, just because I don't want to identify them, like name them in a video because I don't want anyone reaching out to them specifically and or harassing them. I don't think that's okay, and I don't think we should go that direction with this. We should keep things very factual, and we should also keep things very above board, right? And so in my opinion, I don't want anyone reaching out to the co-runners of this con. It just wouldn't be appropriate. And so I don't want to have any part in that. But I will give the facts. And the facts is, yes, they owned a yoga studio and they closed it down, and they didn't seem to honor any refunds, and there's people wanting refunds. There's also evidence that they owed about $40,000 related to this property of the yoga studio, but somehow that settled sometime between February and September. Like at some point that settled the $40,000. That's a lot of money. So they shut down the studio, and they said it was because of their success in the event planning space. That is the Once Upon a Con situation. So they closed down because they were busy with that. And also, I do have evidence that they promised to pay $5,000 to an author as an author endorsement as part of Once Upon a Con to help them get their book edited and published, and to help them because they are a United States veteran who has been injured. And this actually gives me like the creepy crawly goosebumps all over my body right now as I'm talking about it, because they did not follow through with their promise, and they put this veteran in an extremely precarious financial situation. Also, when they reached out to this particular person, they said that they were keeping it secret. So the two con runners, the two of them, were going to keep it secret, and they mentioned they wanted to keep it secret. Why were they keeping it secret? It's because they knew they weren't going to follow through with it, I feel like. Why would you keep it something like this a secret? They had a board. Once Upon a Con had a board, and we'll talk about all of that shenanigans. They still do, I don't know, it's changed. But they could have come to their board and said, hey, we're thinking about doing this thing where we gift authors money as like kind of like an endorsement, and this money goes to helping you publish your book, and we want to help you. That is all fine and dandy, but the fact that they wanted it to be secret, why? I don't get it. The author has come forward and said they never got the money, and not only that, they're also out money for the doubloon situation. So they really are putting themselves out there saying like, I was promised this money, and it's very upsetting because now I'm having all these financial problems because I thought I was going to get this $5,000, promised this money, and I never got it. And I just think that is so slimy of the co-runners, the con runners to do. It's just, that is not okay. So I'm finding out all of these things that they've been doing also over the years. So if we rewind back, I mentioned their board. They had a board of directors back in like 2024, and the entire board just like left. And also all of the previous, they had a huge, everybody left Once Upon a Con. Between artists, the cosplayers, the staff, the board, there was a huge mass exodus. And also staff at this point, you know, before there was a mass exodus, there was a lot of staff members who were treated very unkindly. And that gives me the creepy goosebumps too, because I have seen allegations of what they've done, and all I have to say is it's extremely not okay to treat your employees like this. I trust the person that's saying what happened to them. Like, I trust them, and they seem very, very sweet, and just to hear what happened is incredibly upsetting. But right now, they're fighting for all the authors and everybody who is owed money. Wow, I'm getting emotional because I can't say exactly what I'm talking about here. I don't want to put it in my video just for everyone's privacy purposes. But there's been a lot that these two individuals have done that there's no excuse for. There's no excuse for any of these things that they've done in the past that I've heard of. And if these things are indeed true, I wouldn't trust them to literally hold an event for 5 people, let alone 6,000. they have no trust. I wouldn't trust them. Okay, so to get back into the accounting stuff, I wanted to talk a little bit about how I was trying to figure out how they could even afford the Gaylord. And after talking with individuals who are close to Marriott and they know a lot of information about how much conference rooms cost, how much AV costs are, I was getting quotes of like $700,000 of how much it would cost to rent the space and get the AV and do all the stuff. But the more I've heard is that Once Upon a Con didn't pay that much money because they just rented the space, but they didn't have any of the bells and whistles that comes with that space when people are running cons at the Gaylord in DC. It's an incredibly expensive resort hotel. It's somewhere between $500,000 and $800,000, if not more. However, we're not talking about these numbers because they just booked rooms, like conference rooms, ballroom, and they didn't seem to, and they went through a third party for the AV. So it was hard to figure out how much money they actually paid, but I have it on good assumption that they paid around $300,000 for the Gaylord. And I think that's because they cheapied out on a lot of stuff. Like they didn't have decorations. The AV, they went with a third party. It's hard to tell how much that AV company was, but I did hear that it was an expensive option for them to choose, but not as expensive as going through the Gaylord. And then also when it comes to food, I don't know what their expenses were because it doesn't appear like they had anything provided by the convention. If we think about it, the cafe, the food was supplied by the staff. For the balls, there were drinks, but the drinks had to be purchased, right? And they were extremely expensive. Actually, I would say unusually expensive, even for a resort hotel, which makes me think, this is just me thinking, right, that they booked the room and they booked the bartender, but they did the cash bar option, obviously. And the amount that they were charging for drinks makes it look like they paid like the least possible amount of money to have a bartender in that room. And their DJ and their AV, and I have no idea. That's a black hole for me, how much they paid. And all the math that I did, I cannot understand how they have any money right now to pay anybody. And it just, the math is not mathing. I recently found a chart that I can't share, but it showed how many tickets they were expecting to sell for Once Upon a Con. They listed out how many tickets they expected to sell, and they multiplied that by how much the ticket costs, and then they had a column called profit, and then they just immediately put that value in the profit column. Now, my accountant mind immediately shattered at the thought of this because you don't just immediately call ticket sales profit right off the bat. You don't recognize that as profit. The person paying for that service, that event, didn't get that service and or event yet. And so it's not your profit yet. You can't recognize it as profit. You can't even spend it. And that's good practice with a convention, is you really have to earmark it in an account saying like, this money will be great eventually, but maybe for next year. You can't use it. Like, in my opinion, you shouldn't be using it right up until a refund date. That's probably like the last possible moment you can earmark that as not spendable, because that money, if it's able to be refunded, right, you shouldn't mark it as received and now it's profit, right? It's unrecognized revenue in a sense where you can't spend it yet because the person can still call that money back and you would be left holding the bill. So you can't be putting your business in a place like that. Also, with profit, you have to understand your expenses, and they're not even taking into account their expenses. And they also have a chart that depicts their profit margins that they were expecting for the next like 6 years or whatever. And it's just, imagine a chart that's just going straight up, just like that. They didn't depict their profit correctly, so I doubt that their profit margin was accurate as well. And let's just talk about what profit margin is, and stay with me here, guys, because stay with me. I hope this isn't too boring, but we're going to talk about profit margin. And it's important for all of this discussion because it shows how much money they have, which is probably nothing. Let's say that a t-shirt costs $25, right? That shirt, the manufacturer creates that shirt for $15. It costs $15 to make that shirt. So the gross profit that we're talking about is the difference. So it's $25 minus 15. So that's $10 profit, gross profit there. So the gross profit margin is just that $10 gross profit divided by 25. And that's the price of the shirt. And that is about 40%. A shirt that has a price of $25 that costs $15, that's about a 40% profit margin. They, on their chart, said that they were expecting a year-over-year 25 to 30% profit margin. Now, with everything that I can think of, I don't understand how that is possible. I don't. And it seems like they either didn't understand their expenses or didn't, expect to incur so many expenses, because one of them at least was taking a salary that was aggressive, a pretty high salary, about $90,000. They had, indirect costs when it comes to marketing. They had direct costs when it comes to booking the Gaylord and the AV and the DJ and all that junk, like literally everything, the price of the badges, the room blocks, like everything. So when we try to come up with a way to visualize how much money would be left over, it's just impossible, actually. So how they mentioned that they said that 6,000 general admission tickets were sold? Well, they came out later and said it was actually 4,500. So 4,500 general admission tickets. So they also had an option to buy the ticket early for general admission and pay only $100, but they didn't give us the breakdown. So I'm just going to say and give them the benefit of the doubt and say they were all $125, even though they weren't all $125. So we'll take that amount plus the amount for the 200 VIPs plus the amount for the 250 authors and 230 vendors. And so that's about $21,000 there. They said they didn't charge more than their own cost for the vendors. So they said they didn't make any money, but then they listed something in the profit margin. And I was like, do you know what profit means? I don't know if do you know what it means? I don't think you do. But anyways, so we can total that up and it's about $624,000. So that is about how much money they received through ticket sales. I've been doing some research to see if there were any sponsors, like actual sponsors, and I'm looking now. There were no sponsors, so I believe the only funds that they received came from this avenue. Now, there were goodie bags or like little bags given to the guest, and those were all just items sourced from authors and vendors, so that isn't going to be considered in this calculation. We have $624 in ticket sales, and we minus out at least $300,000. So let's just do $300,000 for the Gaylord to actually book the rooms. And we have another $300,000 here. Now, I know for a fact that they paid out a salary, so we'll do minus $90,000. Okay, so we have $234,000. I have a really hard time believing that their expenses were only $300,000. So AV cost, so out of this $234,000, they paid the price of rooms for themselves, which at least was $1,500. So we'll just do that. We'll take everything that they could have possibly paid. Price of upkeep of a website, that's pretty minimal. Marketing, AV, DJ, things like that. At least all of that, maybe like $100,000. And then we have $132,000 left over. But then let's take away all of the amounts that they paid for their costumes for the fashion show that they participated in. Each costume was probably around $4,000. So let's say let's actually make it a little bit lower. Let's just cut it and say it's $7,500. We have $125,000. It's really hard to estimate how much the Gaylord actually costed them, because if it costs like the average amount, like say a $600,000, they wouldn't have been able to afford the conference at all, and they would be seriously in the red. So it makes me consider, so we go back to that $624,000 that they received. Just say that the Gaylord costed, which is the average amount of what a convention would be there, like $600,000. So we have $24,000. So I'm having a hard time understanding what their costs could have been, because it can vary so widely. Say the Gaylord was $600,000 and all their expenses and everything costed $600,000. I think that's reasonable for what they were spending, and they were spending like tomorrow wasn't a thing. Like, and also I have it on good, like I know through people who have worked with these two individuals that these people had no concept of money. Like they were just spending, and they didn't have a care in the world. And so that seems like $600,000. That seems like a more reasonable price to me. So let's say 624 minus the 600,000 equals 24,000. So that $24,000 in a rough profit number would be a net profit margin of 3.8%. So that is me being optimistic in a way. It's 3.8%, and they were saying that it would be like 25-30%. And so I just think the level of audacity or financial confusion happening here is so widely strange to me, because we have a number 3.8% and they were thinking that they were going to get a profit margin of 25 or 30%. It's just so wildly different. And that's even me being very kind with the numbers. Be even more kind with the numbers when we go with our Gaylord costed only $300,000 and say they had $100,000 left over. That's a little different. So we'll do that. So let's say they had $100,000 in profit and their net profit margin would be, and divide that. Like that is very, very nice. Like they didn't pay for anybody's rooms. They didn't pay for any food. They didn't do any of the things that they said they were going to do. So they should have had at least $100,000. So say they had $100,000. Divide that by, the 624,000 that they said they received. We have a profit margin of 16%. That's roughly half of what they said they were going to have. I just think it shows how they didn't know how to plan, and they were so wildly off in their estimates from the very beginning. And so I know why now, after doing all of this math and driving myself crazy, I do know now why the board originally left, because the level of crazy here is insane. If we go back to the board situation, there was Second Star Events, who does balls. They put together balls. I felt really weird saying that. I don't know. But they put together balls, and they do a really fantastic job from what I've seen. They look great. But they were part of the board with that worked with Once Upon a Con, and they were going to work with them, and they're going to run the balls for them. They put out a statement on social media saying that there was an egregious misappropriation of funds. Mainly, the board was told that the Once Upon a Con finances were not sufficient to provide proper payroll after October 31st, 2024. The board then demanded answers and solutions to this problem. The solutions provided to the board to substantiate their claims of financial stability and spending, in the board's opinion, were obtainable and unrealistic to sustain a business and the employees thereof. This includes the ability to pay employees their agreed upon salaries and in an appropriate and professional manner. Business accounts versus personal bank accounts, PayPal, etc. As one of these potential solutions, employees were presented with several paths, among which included going part-time or working for free when it became clear that the business was not sustainable given the current financial issues. But several instances of inappropriate behavior, including unwanted verbal harassment and advances, along with putting employees and guests in unsafe situations with witnesses present in each instance, manipulation and coercion based on withholding salary payments and benefits with the threat to the employee's overall reputation and their good standing within the community, dissemination of false information, defamation of competitors, and community members' characters, including the claim that Once Upon a Con had acquired various companies and used this information as ammunition to bring others on board. We also consider the team members at Once Upon a Con friends and collaborators until it became clear that the underlying motivation of the business was manipulative and without consideration for those who are working tirelessly to put on an exceptional event. Wow. When I read that, I was stunned. And so it also validated a lot of the things that I've been hearing from people who used to work for Once Upon a Con and things that they've been going through. Let's just say there's a lot more to this than just a shitty convention. And when I made that first video, you know, a month or whatever ago, almost a month ago, the week after the event, I did not think that I was going to find out all of this information. It just gets worse and worse and worse what I've discovered. And this is why I'm saying, like, this is Netflix documentary like level shit here. Like, this is insane. But yeah, and I wanted to shout out just a couple things that you can do to help. There is a fundraiser that there's some individuals that are trying to put together a fundraiser. Myself, and I'm going to try to help with that in any way I possibly can. So I'm working with the people who are directly involved to see if I can help with that in any capacity. And once I know more about that fundraiser, I'll definitely let you know. Also, there's a company called Vital Jewelry Co. It's a brand spanking new business, and you can find the creator on TikTok. They're amazing. And so they're selling a doubloon, just a little cute bronze doubloon, and I purchased it myself, and 75% of the profits of the doubloon will go to authors basically that have been screwed out of money. And so there is a whole form that they can fill out to get money from this company, and the doubloon is super cute. And if you want to support, that's a really good way to do it. There's a link down here in my description. There's also a list of authors that were at the event, and I'm going to do whatever I can to get that list to everybody. Either I'll post it in a community post or I'll post it on my next video. But a list of all the authors along with their social media handles so you can go buy their books and support them. A lot of them are going through kind of hell right now to get their money back. A lot of these authors were also at the Million Lives Book Festival, and the fact that they were screwed over twice like this. And so at this point, I'm sure a lot of them are starting to reconsider going to conventions, and especially first-time conventions. It's going to be harder to get authors at first-time conventions considering how badly they've been going lately. Anyways, I'm going to continue making these videos, and I know that a lot of people have died down talking about it because they're, you know, the drama's over, you know, it's over, let's just move past it. But it really isn't. And the more you learn about what actually happened and the people behind it, you realize they're going to do this again. They're trying to do this again. They're literally pre-selling tickets for next year. And if they try to do this and they succeed, other people that are just as deceptive are going to do this again, and they're going to have an event and that are going to screw over more authors. And then it will become so common to have events that just suck, right? And I'm not okay with that. As someone who reads, as someone who writes, as someone who enjoys, you know, sci-fi and fantasy, and I don't want to see things devolve in that direction. And that's where we're going. Like, if we don't do anything about this, and if we don't speak up about it, like, this is going to be the norm for events in the book community. And people are just going to think that they can just deceive, commit fraud, like, do these things and get away with it. And so now I'm saying, like, let's just make sure they don't get away with it, is what I'm saying. So I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that they do not, including telling you everything that I can find out. And there's a lot out there. Like, the fact that I have 4 videos and some of them are super long. So if you have made it this far in the video and you've watched all my other videos, like, wow, thank you Thank you so much. I'm a super new YouTuber and I appreciate any of your support. I appreciate you so, so much. I've been posting 1 to 2 times a week all about book drama or things that concern authors, you know, things like that. But yeah, thank you so much for staying to the end of my video. If you're not already subscribed, please subscribe. And if you haven't liked the video, please like it. It really helps spread the word about what's going on, because a lot of people are starting to like say, oh yeah, Once Upon a Con, that was a disaster. Okay. And then they learn about it and then they move on. But it's really not time to move on yet. There's so much going on. There's so much the insidious layers of the situation just keep getting worse. And the more I find out, the more I'm shocked. And we need to keep eyes on this because they're going to do it again, guys. They're going to do it again. So let's just not let them. Okay. So, well, anyways, I'll see you soon in the next video. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Bye.